First item of business is House Bill 231, College Credit Retention. Representative McGuire, you're on.
Thank you and good morning, members of the committee. I appreciate so very much you're taking the time to come in and listen to the presentation. Again, this would be House Bill number 231. The issue is that here in Wyoming, currently we rank 44th amongst the 50 states in adults aged 25 to 44 with a bachelor's degree or higher. If you look at the statistics, less than a high school education is 9.7%. Our high school graduation rate, we knock it out of the park at 90.3%.
Whoa. Where did that number come from?
That came from the 2018 US census data.
20118. 90 point what?
90.3%.
Does that include GED?
That I don't know. I didn't dig that deeply into it.
Because it's radically higher than what we see from the K-12 statistics.
And I'll go on to the next item. So again, according to the census data, we have a large population of people with some college education. And then it goes down dramatically to bachelor's at 16.9 and graduate at 10%. If you look at other data and looking at the entire adult population, again, the census data is just the 25 to 44-year-old. So that may be where the difference is. If you look at the entire body of adult population, then it takes the number of bachelor's degrees down to 48th or 49th. So as with everything, it depends on how you slice it and how you look at it. But the point that I would bring forward is, for various reasons, here in Wyoming, we have a large population of people with some college education, but not a completed bachelor or master or above. And that problem was highlighted in the Endow report. And I would steer you to page 24 of that report if you would like to go back and look at it, where there was a call for us to bring that up to 67% of the workforce to have a advanced degree by the year 2025, which was obviously a very optimistic call that won't be met. And as I mentioned before, a lot of it is due to the expanse of the state and the economy. We have a lot of people that can leave high school and get a job in the energy industry and make very good money, and or maybe get into healthcare or start a family. Later in life, they decide maybe they would like to go back to school and complete that degree. And unfortunately, it seems like the same old story. When they go back to their local college, they're told, we're sorry, your credits are over 10 years old, they've expired, and you'll have to start from scratch. And that is the purpose of this bill. So during the House committee meeting, we heard testimony to the contrary. We were told that the colleges have, I will say, policies in place that prevent this, but I would submit to you that it still happens and it's not just anecdotal data. When I asked the former president of our university and several of our community colleges, I was told, well, it has to do with our accreditation. And so, not trying to be confrontational, I said, can you just show me in black and white where it says you can't accept credits that are over 10 years old? And then the story changed to, well, it's just not customary to accept credits that are more than 10 years old. So that's why I've drafted this bill and I'm bringing it for you or to you. And it does three things. It says that if you have earned college credits from a Wyoming university or college with an acceptable grade, that those college credits don't expire unless the university or college can provide some reason that the credit is no longer relevant. And I would use my own example. When I was in college, I took Fortran computer programming, which I have used exactly 0 times since I got out of college. So if I want to go back to school and they told me, hey, your Fortran computer programming is not going to be transferable anywhere, no argument. I understand that. That's completely reasonable. But I would ask maybe that reason be put in writing. And the next item is that if that credit can't be used, it gives the student an opportunity to go the next step up the ladder not necessarily bringing it before the Board of Trustees, but bringing before one of their designated agents and just saying, hey, I'd like to have an adult conversation. Why is it that, for example, in my case, if I took calculus and got a B in calculus, has calculus changed that much over the last 2,000 years? I don't think so. So it just gives an opportunity for these returning adults to have a discussion. And again, as I mentioned before, if they took a course and they didn't have an acceptable grade, this bill does nothing at all to interfere with the college's right to decline to accept that credit. And I would say, for example, if the student took music appreciation and got a D minus, that's not transferable. Understood. Nobody's going to argue with you about that or with the college about that. I would just bring to light a story of an individual. I'm going to call him Tom. He's in my Rotary Club. This last summer, through no fault of his own, he was running a major service company in my town. It was about a $10 million a year division of his company. He had about 30 employees at any given time, and his parent company decided to close the Wyoming operation. And so he's got 2 kids in the high school that's in my house district. And he went up to our local college and he said, this is where I am. I want to take this break. I want to finish my college degree. I'm not going to move my kids again while they're in high school. How do I get from here to here? And the answer was, well, we're sorry, but your college credit is too old. We can't accept any of that. We're going to have to start you from scratch. So he got up, picked up his checkbook and went out. And at my college, like many of yours, there are other universities that offer college credit courses on that campus. And so he got in touch with one of them. They created a program. He's going to take some courses at the local college. He's going to take some courses online. He knows exactly what the roadmap is to completing his degree. And the unfortunate thing is that all that money that he's spending is going out of state, never to return to the state of Wyoming. And you know, I hate to say that some of our colleges are their own worst enemy, but you know, before the pandemic, there were a couple of big online colleges and things, but now, I mean, my kids are at the university right now. They have been taking virtual courses. Virtual courses are the new normal. There are going to be out-of-state colleges that are going to be competing on a price point with our local colleges. And again, all of that money is going to be going out of state, and not only our money, but also the loyalty. I mean, my friend Tom, who is an industry that basically bought and paid for our college system. I mean, we would not have our local college where the good chairman and I are from if it weren't for minerals, period, end of story. And, you know, these people are, he feels that when he needed something, you know, he just didn't get any encouragement or cooperation. So that's why it's here. I'm hoping that this will be a positive thing, that it will help people to go back to school. It will help our colleges, whether they want to advertise it or not. Maybe just the opportunity there will encourage people to think again. And if they have college credit, or maybe they want to take that next step in their degree or their career, go back to school, better yourself, and help us move the state forward and help these people get that next step, move to that next rung. And for example, my friend Tom, you know, completely capable individual. He was running crews of 30 and 40 at any given time. You don't run 30 oil field guys if you don't have some good leadership capability. But he doesn't feel like he's able to move up the company chain until he has that bachelor's degree. And that's what this bill is for. So thank you. I'd stand for questions.
Okay. Right. Any questions? Senator Brightman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative McGuire, for bringing this bill. Since I've been in office for what, 4 years now, I get asked about this so often. Whether I'm out at the grocery store, people run into me. Of all the issues that seem to come up over and over again, this issue of transfer credits and expiring credits really gets in the craw of Wyoming residents. And rightfully so. It doesn't make any sense to them, and they end up, like you said, taking their money elsewhere and going online and finishing their degree elsewhere. My question is on page 2, line 5. It says grade in a Wyoming university or college. Was there any thought into expanding that to any university or college? Or does it have to be, for the purposes of this legislation, just Wyoming college credits? Can you answer that for me? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A good chairman of this committee one time told me that good legislation is incremental. And so my thought was to take it one bite at a time. I agree with you, Senator, completely. The argument will always be, well, how do we check the accreditation and how do we check the quality of that education? So my thought was to start with Wyoming colleges. And I think that it's important that if we, the people of the state of Wyoming, have been funding these colleges, then they should be self-policing. And if one of these colleges says that, hey, that other college over there wasn't producing quality candidates, well, that's a problem that should be identified and solved. And, I can tell you that when I went from our community college down to the university, that accusation was made. And, I had to retake a couple courses, and I can tell you that, well, I will just say that I found nothing wrong with the education that I received at my local community college. Go T-Birds.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just trying to think through the process of how this would work out. And I like looping in the Board of Trustees, but then you put in its designee, and then it starts for me falling apart of who that could be. Who do you kind of envision it to be? I'm trying to just sort through how that might work. I'm uncomfortable with the designee.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman, if I may address that.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I don't anticipate that the trustees would want to be there during registration week so that they could, if there was a question, that they could be there. So my thought was they should be able to have a designated individual. Again, hopefully the next step up. And then one of the amendments on the House side was to add in that designee would not be the same person or governing body that made the initial decision. And again, this is not meant to be a confrontational, let's go to district court and fight it out and maybe end up in the Supreme Court. This is meant to be just give individuals, adults. Again, these aren't 18-year-olds that can't decide if they want to be a fry cook or a brain surgeon. These are adults who are coming back. And typically, for example, if it was me, I would want further education on what I do, business. So, I'm just saying to that institution, give them an opportunity to have an adult conversation with somebody. And that person should be able to explain, again, Fortran computer programming. If they say, hey, that just doesn't transfer to anything, these are adults and they can have an adult conversation. I would also say that in our local community, we know the people that we elect to be trustees. They run for that office. And unfortunately, they don't seem to hear from, and the good senator made that mention, this is not something that I've dreamed up. I mean, this is a problem that I have heard ever since I got out of junior college. It is a real issue, and our trustees just don't seem to hear about it. Or, once they get in that position, they maybe that issue is just not brought forward to them. And so that's why I'm saying, ultimately, it should end up with the trustees. With my business, if somebody's got a problem, guess where the buck stops? It's with me. If I were a trustee, on the boards that I am on, somebody's got a problem, call me. My cell phone number is there for everybody. I'm like the good senator that's in Washington, D.C. My number's there. Call me. I'll address it. So I hope that answers the question.
Mr. Chairman, a follow-up? It doesn't. I'm just trying to think through the levels of so the students at making the ask, and I'm guessing, and I might not be using the right terms, they're seeking a determination or permission from someone in the admissions office would be my guess. And they say no. And then I'm trying to think of who's between them and the Board of Trustees, Dean of Students. And so I'm just trying to think of if they ask the admissions office says, no, your credits are too old. Then is like the appropriate person, then the Dean of Students. And then if the Dean of Students says no, then they can appeal to the board. I'm just trying to really make it crystal, because if I were in this situation, I don't know what I would do with this language. That's the hard part. I want to make it clear, because I agree that there's a problem and there's a solution here, but that's what I'm getting after, is kind of who are the levels and how does this escalate?
Let me elaborate on that a little. The concern I would have would be that the educational bureaucracy and all these places are top heavy in that, have turned them down. And I think we need to get somehow outside the educational bureaucracy to get a reasonable decision, because they'll protect each other. At the same time, I don't like getting the trustees involved in micromanaging the institution. We got a problem with that right now at the university. Should we have the trustees designate some individual just automatically, rather than saying the appeal is to the Board of Trustees? What's your thinking on all that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I tried to make it a gentle push, and ultimately I think that it should be, again, with our local college, I think it should be a trustee level question. However, as I mentioned, I don't think that they should be ready to convene at a moment's notice during registration period, because that can be, a pretty wide window. So my hope would be that it would never come to that. My hope would be that it wouldn't have to be used, but if it was, I think that they should, amongst themselves, they should take responsibility for it, and they should point to somebody within the organization and say, you're the one who's going to be responsible if there's a question. You listen to the question and come back to us with your final decision. Again, all of these, I'm not going to comment on my outside opinion of the bureaucracy, but yeah, it's there, and where to put it, I don't know. So I'd invite your input.
Mr. Chairman, just thinking out loud, because this creates a presumption that the credit is good. And so when you create that presumption, then it seems like the burden then shifts to the university or college to say that it's not. And why, maybe that's a solution, is when they provide that justification of why it's not, that has to be blessed by the trustees. And so unless the trustees bless that, the credit is presumed valid. Maybe that's a way. I get nervous about the designee, and then you get the student calling. These universities are huge, and colleges. And so that is my concern, is who's the designee? How does that work? And I think unless it's really clear, I don't want to create more problems then. So maybe that's an idea, Mr. Chairman. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Mr. Chairman, I would agree completely. Yes, the presumption is there intentionally to say the college credit is good, with the exception of, and policy wise, they can say, if you got a D or below, that doesn't even rise up to the level of consideration. That's understandable. But yes, the presumption is just like any legal rebuttable presumption. Presumption is credit is good. It's up to that college to designate why, using my Fortran computer programming. Too old, got it, understand that. With regard to who that designee should be, I kind of wanted to leave that up to the individual, because, for example, the university is far different than my local college, which is far different than the other senator's local college. So I wanted to leave it a rather gentle push.
Mr. Chairman, another idea would be, you have the presumption, and then it doesn't take effect until the president of the college gives their blessing. And then if the student wants to continue to appeal it, then that's when you loop in the Board of Trustees. I'm just trying to think it through, but maybe that's a more practical solution, because obviously the Board of Trustees for the colleges, they don't always meet frequently. And to your point, if they're going to rebut a presumption, the president at the highest level of each institution should be made aware of that. What would you think about that approach?
I think that the president's loyalty would obviously, well, the president's loyalty may be more towards the academic side as opposed to in my community, our trustees are, the local working folk that run for that office typically because they are passionate about our local college and making it better. And so I think that they would have more of an outsider's view and more of an adult. I'm a returning adult student and I want to be treated as an adult. I think that they would probably have, but that's speculation. And I'm here, the reason that we have committees is to make bills better. And so I'm open to suggestions.
I've got a question in another area. Bottom page 2, top page 3, Wyoming Administrative Procedures Act shall not apply. That is a little different. Why did you write it that way?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, I didn't want to take this into a situation where people were calling on the Administrative Procedures Office here in Cheyenne to hear about Fortran computer programming in Riverton. And then the next step is the district court and then the Supreme Court.
Yeah. Okay. Keep it out of the legal. Okay. That makes sense.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, just back to the thought I had. So just the logistics of, the admissions office or whoever that entity is that says, wait a minute, we see this weird credit class. We don't think it qualifies. They start looking at it closer. The president signs off on it, but then the president has a duty to report the number, report to the trustees. Because that's the check, I think, on the president is that's always who they answer to is the board. So maybe they don't need to be involved in the ministerial duty of reviewing it, but they're made aware. And if something catches their eye, then they can say, wait a minute, why did we, deny this particular course? Or just so they're at least made aware, to your point, that a lot of times they don't even know. I'm just trying to think of a solution because I just don't know about the designee and who that is and who that might be. Just thoughts on that, maybe?
Mr. Chairman, I'm open. Again, this is, that's why we have the committee system. And I'm not going to tell you that I think that that's a great idea. And I'm here to ask for your assistance to make this better. And again, ultimately to help our adult returning students.
Okay. I'm going to take a different point of view on this one. We've got very disparate institutions. The university is worlds different from, say, Eastern Wyoming Community College. With the bill as written, hearing before Board of Trustees or its designee, I think that or its designee language with the then qualifier, it can't be the same person that denied them to start with. You're going to get a bit of an independent hearing with some reporting on the summary of what's going on, at least back to the trustees. I think as a gentle push to try to see if we can't say, look, we got a problem. We're giving you a solution where you can work it out within your institution and the trustees can govern the institution as they see appropriate. I think this may work perfectly well and be adaptable to the different circumstances we've got and get the decision outside the standard bureaucracy. And I think maybe this may be the sponsor of the bill said it was a gentle push. And I think that's an accurate description that I think maybe we ought to pass this. And then if we continue to hear of problems down the road, we can come back with something a good deal fiercer and more formal. Sometimes you just need a gentle push. We used to have just tremendous problems. I'll bet the first 20 years I was in the legislature, I got more calls on my credits will, or my son's credits or daughter's credits will transfer to any college in the country except University of Wyoming. And they finally buried the hatchet between the university and the community colleges, got that straightened out. I think maybe a push here is what's needed, and maybe this does it without too much interfering with the management of the institutions. And I think, frankly, I think the sponsor was very wise to try to keep it out of the legal system. That's not where you ought to settle this sort of thing. So, unless somebody wants to make a specific amendment. Okay. Thank you very much. Is there anybody else here present who wants to speak to this bill? And are we zooming? Okay. Is there anybody in the waiting room?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, you have Mr. Ben Moritz, who's raised his hand. If any other attendees would like to testify, can they please raise their yellow virtual hand? Okay, Mr. Chairman, it looks like Mr. Ben Moritz, can you please turn your camera and your audio on, please?
Okay, let's admit him. We'll start with him and then we'll come. There's at least one in the room that wants to testify. Mr. Morris, if you can hear us, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me first by introducing myself.
Yes.
My name is Dr. Ben Moritz. I'm Deputy Director of the Wyoming Community College Commission. I would like to provide a little bit of background on this particular bill. First of all, the attention to the needs of adult learners and adult students is very important, and we completely share the representative's concerns about that. One issue that the colleges would like to bring up are the existing policies that we have, how they relate to accreditation. I can provide more detail on that if you'd like. And then also the progress that we've made on these types of issues through the Common Course Numbering System and WYO transfer to statewide initiatives that we are just wrapping up that address the issues of ease of transfer of credits across the state. So first of all, the existing policies for the 7 colleges do have an assumption that credits will continue to count. And then there are exceptions given for particular programs. Examples of those programs would be like nursing, and in some cases, criminal justice, I believe. And those particular departments are picked out because they have time-sensitive materials. So for instance, if you had a nursing course from 20 years ago, medical technology has shifted. And so that would have to be examined. So that is the case. Also, I reached out to the colleges to try to obtain a number of times that credits are rejected because they have aged out. I wasn't able to get an exact number because that data is not collected, but it seems to be very rare for that to happen. I know that anecdotes are powerful and circulate for a long time, but we don't have a lot of evidence that this is an ongoing issue, particularly given the Common Course Numbering System and all of the alignment that's gone on through that particular program. And then finally, the accreditation issue. The Higher Learning Commission requires that colleges and universities that are accredited by them have a policy in place to ensure that credits that are brought in either from the same institution or other institutions are academically valid. How you set up that particular policy is up to the college. That policy is then submitted to the HLC along with all of the other policies and all of the other information whenever you go up for reaccreditation. And they review it to ensure that you have a policy that makes sense and that you have people with the adequate academic expertise to make those calls. So as I was listening to the discussion earlier, one concern that I had was that if the opportunity to approve a student's petition exists outside of the college or the university and is given to someone who doesn't have that academic expertise, that could complicate the policies that the accreditors have asked us to put into place. And so with that, I would open up for questions. And thank you for the opportunity.
My question, quite bluntly, is this bill doesn't appear to take it outside the institution. It does get you a bit of an independent review, but the trustees simply have to use a little common sense in who they pick to be their designee for the hearing. And I think you're fine. I don't see an accreditation problem unless they're trying to do some kind of a restriction that we really ought to argue with them. I don't think they want that kind of an argument. I really don't see that as a problem here.
Mr. Chairman, if that's the case, then I would agree with you. That I just wanted to put out that possible concern.
Yeah, I don't think it's a real concern. Sen Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Moritz, when you get a chance, could you send us, I'm just trying to look online to see if I could find just more information about accreditation. And I just want to put a finer point, like if there's something written out there that you can show me and says, this is our concern, that would be helpful. I know we had a big discussion about accreditation for colleges when we were talking about community colleges, maybe offering 4-year degrees in limited circumstance, but some of that information is just not fresh. So if you could provide that, I'm happy to share it with my colleagues too. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
Senator Ellis, I would be happy to send that on to the LSO. In most cases where the accreditation language lies, they allow for quite a bit of flexibility to have the institutions establish policies that fit their needs. So they're not especially prescriptive. The only language would come out as far as to ensure the academic integrity of the program or something to that effect. But I can send that along. They do allow for quite a bit of flexibility. And so sometimes in these instances that can be difficult if you're trying to nail down, do I or don't I with a particular policy.
Yeah, I think that what ultimately you're going to be judged by here is if we start getting a flood of complaints as legislators. And there haven't been too many so far, but as our economy is transforming and is changing, we're expecting a lot more are going to come back for more education. And if this problem isn't solved, it could turn out to be a high priority for the legislature. We start getting a lot of complaints. So my recommendation to you is to view this, just as the sponsor said, this is a gentle push. It's not going to disrupt you too much, but if it doesn't solve the problems, we might, and we hear a lot from back home, we might get much more vigorous, because I think it is going to be something that's affecting a lot more people. Okay, thank you very much. Anybody else? There was somebody here. Yes, sir.
Morning, Mr. Chairman. I'm Bill Mai from the University of Wyoming. Nice to finally connect with the committee here. It's been a busy session for all of us. Really, rather than comments, I have probably more questions about the bill than anything. And the two primary questions I would have is maybe for the committee or for the bill's sponsor. Has this been discussed with trustees or with the current UW administration prior to bringing it as legislation? And the reason why I ask that question is I think because the university has been extremely sensitive. The trustees have provided a guiding hand to the various university administrations over the last 8 years that I've been there with regard to the transfer programs with the community colleges, for example. A lot of effort has gone into that to make sure that courses transfer properly and that people aren't wasting their time at either institution, whichever institution they're at. And I think everybody at all of these institutions takes that extremely seriously. And it's in no small part because of our trustees, because of the trustees at the community colleges, and because of the interactions, frankly, with legislators. So that would be my first question is, has this been discussed with the boards of trustees or with the administrations? Because I would be very surprised at the University of Wyoming if it wouldn't get a very serious and broad audience, frankly, if it were brought up there. And then the second question I have is somewhat related to, and I'm certainly not going to add or subtract from anything that Dr. Moritz said. But it does have to do with the whole accreditation process and all of that, and this notion of the Administrative Procedures Act and all of that is, does this unintentionally potentially create a liability for the institutions if there is no, I think I don't have a copy of the bill in front of me, but I believe the words were in perpetuity, that the credits would be presumed to be applicable in perpetuity. And I'll speak from my own personal standpoint, where the calculus that I took 35 years ago, I assure you the calculus hasn't changed, but my head has. And my ability to recall calculus at those levels certainly has. And so the question that brings to my mind is, if I go through this process and I'm somehow allowed to count those courses that I took 35 years ago, and I go to get a mechanical engineering degree with those, for example, and I fail miserably in the next level of mechanical engineering degrees, or mechanical engineering courses, rather, I'm sorry. Do I have a case against the university for allowing me to get into a situation where I fail? Or, as I progress through that program, if my knowledge is that old, as once I reach a point of failure, is that the university's fault or is that my fault? And I can't tell from the bill. And I think that's partly why some of those accreditation expiration dates are kind of out there with regard to the sciences and engineering in particular. So those are my questions, Mr. Chairman.
And let me say for the newer members here, Bill, you were on the LSO staff when? Fiscal staff, wasn't it?
Mr. Chairman, that is correct. I was I was here from 1990 until 2012, and
Okay.
I had been.
I know I remember you.
Yeah,
from
sorry.
And
A lot of
he
new
was very
faces.
good when he was here.
A lot of new faces, Mr. Chairman. I used to be in Don Richards' old spot, and prior to that, did fiscal analysis for the folks that preceded me.
Okay. Sen Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm just I mean, I think you asked questions that you know the answer is probably no. So I don't know that we know the answer either, but when it says to have the contact or the university and the trustees been contacted, I don't know. I think you would probably know that better than I, coming from the university, if the university trustees have been contacted, but that aside. So, you know, this creates a presumption. I think what we heard though, in the Bill's presentation was there's this kind of 10-year, that's the magic number. Is there, I'm just trying to think of a solution. So is there another way to say that the student, maybe instead of getting rid of a presumption, you say the student, if their credits are 10 years or older, can petition for the recognition of the course to be counted. And then you can consider factors. Maybe your mechanical engineering isn't fresh in your mind because you haven't been practicing, but maybe you've been using those skills these last 10 years. So I'm trying to think of a way so that that 10-year kind of magical number can be worked on a little bit. So that's what I'm looking for is, do you have an idea for a solution?
Mr. Chairman, two things. I actually don't know if the trustees or if past trustees were spoken to about this. That is a legitimate, honest, unanswerable question on my end, and I would ask the sponsor that, I guess. I'm not aware. You know, we have a new university president, new as of July, and you know, several previous presidents. And so I don't know which of those presidents may have been talked to. I don't know which trustees may have been talked to. I would be interested to know about the conversation though. And then with regard to, I'm not sure that the 10-year, so there's a, you know, when you look at the HLC, which I think Dr. Moritz referred to and would certainly be a lot better person to talk to about that. I don't know that 10 years is a magic number. I think with regard to certain sciences, 10 years can be a magic number, but I also believe that the university, and I can't speak to the colleges here, I do believe that the university has those appeal processes in place right now for, it's a lot easier with sort of general education requirements. Those are much easier to verify and allow through the process. That I think where you run into the issues is with those higher level courses or the specific courses, whether they're math courses or science courses or that sort of thing. And again, I think the tenure is sort of a basic rule of thumb with regard to science courses, but I don't know how it works on the others. And I think HLC, again, Dr. Moritz can speak a lot better to it than me.
I'm going to call on the sponsor in a moment. But let me say on the liability side, I think that's really a red herring. I do not see how this changes any liability at all. If anything, I think it reduces the risk that one of these individuals who's been out and been successful in the world needs another degree. Some of those people might be capable of hiring a lawyer when you turn them down the first time, causing you quite a bit of trouble. I think having enough due process so that they feel they were fairly treated, I think this bill might be useful for you in that respect. I don't see how it possibly creates any new liability. With that, Representative McGuire, do you want to speak to anything that Mr. Mai has raised?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My discussions were primarily with regard to the university with the president 2 times removed and the current president of our local college, as well as 2 presidents of junior colleges that have since moved on to different areas, plus several of the trustees of our local college.
Okay. Thank you very much. Is there anybody else who wants to speak? Anybody else?
Mr. Chairman, you have Ms. Taylor on Zoom.
Okay. Go ahead.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Erin Taylor. I'm the Executive Director of the Wyoming Association of Community College Trustees, and I'm sorry I'm not there in the room with you. Usually I am, but thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I just wanted to echo some of the what you heard from Dr. Moritz. In terms of the technicalities, he's the person to answer those questions. But in terms of all 7 community colleges, I just want you to understand, and I think the conversation today has been really important, that there are things in place. You know, this bill almost presumes that there aren't procedures and there haven't been gentle nudges from the legislature before. That's why we have the 2+2 articulation agreements. That's why we have a common course numbering system. And you heard from Dr. Moritz that those have been rolling out and work has really been done on those to improve them. And now there's a website where students can go. So there is a lot in process. It's unfortunate if there has been a situation. It is not common, to my understanding. It is not a common thing that happens. But you know, the colleges are very supportive of focusing on these adult workers. We've already testified to that to this committee. It's something that's of course very important to the community colleges. But just to lay out for you that there are things in place, there are procedures, and if there's been an unfortunate circumstance, then then I understand that's why the bill is here today. But it's not for not or a lack of concern, process, etc. So I just wanted to emphasize that to the committee, and I think it's been a great education today for everyone, especially with some new members on the committee. And we'd be happy to get more information to you as you've asked. So thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Chairman.
Look, seeing no questions from the committee, let me ask you one. The things you're citing, it strikes me they have been focused primarily on the issue of transfer of credits from the community college to the university, and to a lesser extent among the community colleges, and don't really deal with the issue that this bill is raising. Is that a correct understanding?
Mr. Chairman, that's probably fair. I think though that, again, like I said, we're accustomed to seeing things coming through the legislature when there are concerns, and that's why we have this process. But you heard from Dr. Moritz and from Mr. Mai with the university that these things are taken very seriously. And if there is a situation where this has happened, then, I'm sorry for something like that happening, but it's not for not taking seriously. The one thing that does kind of concern me is the presumption that the credits are, valid and good. And so there's just a few questions. If there's an opportunity to make the bill better, then that might be the course. But I just wanted to echo what you've heard today and let you know that it's not for a lack of taking this seriously.
Okay. And I would compliment the community colleges and the university on what they've done to get rid of the problem that used to be just in spades all over the place of community college courses not transferring the university. And we all know there are a bunch that should not, because they're not aimed at that. And I think you've been able to communicate that pretty well to the students and largely solved that problem, because that was a terrible problem. But this is a little different. Okay. Seeing no further questions, thank you very much. Is there anybody else here that wants to speak to this? Anybody else?
Mr. Chairman, Dr. Moritz had his hand up again.
Okay, Dr. Moritz, we'll allow it one more time, and then we're going to need to move on.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I just wanted to provide a little bit of an answer to a question you asked about whether the recent work on transferability addressed the credits expiring that you had discussed. And the work on aligning the course names and titles across the 8 institutions does help somewhat for identifying those older credits as well. Although you are correct that that was not the primary purpose of that. Although we do now have a very robust database of over 3,000 courses that does show how they equate across the institutions, and that would be used if a student brought in an old credit.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Seeing no further testimony, public testimony is closed. Committee. Motion is due pass. Any further discussion? Sen Ellis? Okay, seeing no further discussion, call the roll, please.
On House Bill 231, Senator Beitman.
Aye.
Senator Ellis.
No.
Senator Rothfuss.
Senator Ruffus left and I vote.
Senator Salazar.
Aye.
And Chairman Scott.
Aye.
So House Bill 231 engrossed do pass with 4 ayes and 1 no.
Representative McGuire, I see you've got Senator Kinski and Pappas as co-sponsors. Can you either tell us now or caucus with those two and figure out who's going to carry it on the floor? Okay, thank you. Committee, wanted to have some time to talk about joint interim topics and suggestions. Let me ask, is there anybody here in the audience that wants to address us on that score? Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Janine Bayteski from Teton County. I'm not going to give up on this one. I keep pushing every session, but I really believe, Mr. Chair, that it would be very helpful to all of us involved if there was some deep dive work that was done to get into the reporting systems that we have. You heard Gail Simmons testify and how complex the career report is. Mr. Chair, I believe you yourself have tried to dive into it. And, you know, it would be so nice if, for example, we could fill out a piece of paper or fill out something and it would populate all the reports that we have to do. That is indeed not the case that we're dealing with. You look at our attendance. We take attendance the first week of October, right? Those numbers are not scrubbed and ready for publication until mid-December. I just, you know, in today's day and age, I just got to question this. This is, you know, the complication that we're dealing with. Just, there's got to be money in the complication that we deal with. So I've asked for it before. I've asked House Education as well, by the way. So, but I just think the other thing that's really troubling is, you know, we just went through recalibration. Every time we go through the interim, we have report outs from the department and basically report outs about how districts perform versus the model. And I think that's helpful. I mean, I think, you know, we need to have that information, but what happens is that we cut the data so fine as we put it into reports that sometimes we get a black mark against our name because of the way the data is presented versus the reality of the situation. And probably one that comes to mind to me is tutors. You know, we have a classification called tutors. We also have a classification called interventionists. Now you tell me what the difference is between a tutor and an interventionist in terms of, you know, student support. It's that kind of specificity that is required as we're putting some of this data together, that I think if we simplified things some and allowed a process whereby we could put data in once and have it populate all the reports, it would be helpful to all of us. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree. Like when I comb through the crew, it captures a lot, but there's a lot it doesn't get after. And I know like in Laramie one, we hired a diversity and inclusion coordinator, whatever the title is, that's not captured anywhere. And then on the backside of it, it is like, from our perspective, you want to dig in more, like, what does this person do? How much are they paid? Is it making a difference? All those questions. And that's, I think that the problem we have with this system is we don't have the tools. We're not the surgeons, we just have the clubs, and we just can't get in that level. So that's a challenge. I agree that's a problem. I don't know how we fix that, honestly, but something to think about.
Mr. Chair, Senator Ellis, I don't either. But, maybe if we step back and we looked at the things that we do, instead of trying to categorize people by the tradition, forget about the system that exists now. It's sort of like in the old days in industry. Every so often we'd go back to a zero-based budget so that we weren't reliant upon, triangulating from one number to another. Are we so ingrained in what we've been doing that we don't think about it in its right context? Thank you.
It strikes me that you really need a task force of a few of the management people and a bunch of the data geeks saying, why do we need this number? What are we using it for? What's an easier way to capture it? This sort of thing. I think industry regularly does that sort of thing because they can't afford to build up a big reporting system that isn't used. And if we don't get an interim topic, maybe a few of us could work with you and come up with a piece of legislation to touch something like that off, because really there's an interest. I would think there should be an interest in the State Department of Education simplifying it so they can process their data and get it more readily available and useful. But you need to have some people with some line management responsibility involved, so the geeks just don't say, let's expand this thing. I think you're onto something, but figuring out what to do about it is going to take a little work. And so, okay, so that's your suggestion to us.
Yes, sir. And Mr. Chair, I'm happy to sign up to assist in this effort. I think part of the people we need are some of the inputters.
Okay. Can I get a business card from you or something like that so I know how to get a hold of you? Okay. Is there anybody else here that wants to make any suggestions to us about joint interim? Seeing none. Committee?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, Erin Taylor on Zoom would like to make a comment.
Okay, put her on. Erin, go ahead.
There we go. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Again, Erin Taylor with WACD, Wyoming Association of Community College Trustees. For some of the folks on this committee being new, I thought it would be worthwhile to mention the significant conversations that the community colleges have been having in front of several legislative committees, subcommittees, task forces, select committees over the last year. I would really encourage this committee to somehow keep a beat on what those conversations are including and happening, because I think it's just important with some of the bills that we've even heard this year. They were new topics to some folks on the committee. So for instance, there's going to be, I think, a continuation of the Select Committee on Community College Funding and Governance that was discussed in the Joint Appropriations Committee yesterday. And there was a willingness to encourage the Management Council to continue the work of that committee. And why that's important is for the last several years, the community colleges have come forward through the budget process talking about the need for sustainable funding. And that's really the biggest priority that the community colleges have right now. And, it's a tough time facing budget cuts. The community colleges are also facing cuts at the local level when assessed valuations decline, often by double digits. And so that issue of sustainable funding is of top importance. And so how that ties in with the education committee, I think that'll be up to the management council and what you folks decide the level of knowledge that you'd like on these topics as they continue. But I would just encourage that communication so that you are knowledgeable on it when things move forward. There are other things though that are important if you get into the funding allocation model that's in statute for the community colleges. For instance, and how the courses are weighted in delivery of funds to the community college for delivering those courses. And just a really very simple example would be the weight that is given to a general ed class, is kind of like a level 1, but the weight given to a welding class, because it's, smaller class size, higher level of instruction, the technology that's needed, that's weighted higher, for the delivery. But then there's also online delivery. Delivery is weighted less in the funding model. What has absolutely been proven during a pandemic is that delivery of online courses certainly takes just as much work as delivering them in person. And so finding little things like that would just tweak it a little bit would really make sense. So that might be appropriate for this education committee versus the select task force and the work that they're doing to look at sustainable funding models. So, Mr. Chairman, just some ideas for you. I'm happy to answer any questions for you.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, Delancey.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Nice to see you again. My name is Cindy Delancey. I'm the president of the Wyoming Business Alliance. I want to thank you for your work this session and really encourage the good work of this committee to continue on over the interim. I too would like to echo in support of what Ms. Taylor just indicated as far as looking at sustainable, predictable funding for our community colleges. Community colleges really with the relationship with the business community are one of the best tools in our toolbox. We also deeply appreciate the collaboration with the University of Wyoming, but the community colleges bring a little bit of a different level of flexibility and nimbleness to be able to be responsive to the needs of the business community, as opposed to looking at those longer term, maybe 4-year courses of study, as opposed to 2-year degrees or particularly certificates, programs that can give workers skills very quickly and get them in a position that they're able to hone their skills with a certificate and be eligible for jobs within Wyoming. So I encourage the committee to continue the good work as far as finding ways to bring non-traditional students back into our higher education system to be able to be retrained and keep people here working in Wyoming as opposed to seeing them go elsewhere looking for opportunity. I know many of you have some great ideas on that and just look forward to that discussion continuing, hopefully through the Wyoming's Tomorrow discussion in the future or something else. But that focus on bringing non-traditional students back to be able to retrain or increase their earning capacity through education is certainly, we all would benefit from that in Wyoming. I also encourage the committee to continue its work on looking at the model. K-12 funding is an ongoing topic of discussion. As you all know and are becoming very familiar, Article 7, Section 9 of our Constitution requires a thorough and efficient education system in Wyoming. So whether that conversation is just solely focused to the model, obviously, is the discretion of this committee and leadership. We would like to see, and I'll continue to ask, discussions surrounding the basket of goods. I think I certainly don't want to speak for Ms. Teskey behind me, but I think there's probably some alignment between the education community and the business community that no one seems happy with our current basket, and maybe that there's some commonality on ways to find some suggestions for improvement and modernization to make sure that everyone's needs are being met. In the education community, providing that education, but also the needs of the business community as the end users of our education system. We need to be teaching our students skills that are essential to help them be successful and prepared for the 21st century workforce. So I know you're on all of that. I just wanted to express my support for the conversations continuing, and just also remind you that as a leader in the business community, I stand ready and willing to continue to work with this committee and the education community in trying to find solutions instead of just continually identifying points of just continuing to identify what we already know, and that is we have a structural deficit on how to pay for some of this. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate you and this committee, and thank you for your good work this session.
Committee? Seeing nothing from the committee, let me react to one thing. The federal stimulus thing has really preempted a lot of our work in terms of the funding model. For the next 2 years, we're going to be governed by that maintenance of effort, presuming we accept the funds, and I think we will. If we can preserve the funds and the current recalibration bill, and we're going to deal with the floor today in the Senate, is aimed that way. If we can use those to preserve some reserves going forward, and combine that with what the House has given us in terms of the reductions down to the maintenance of effort that the feds have set, we aren't quite going to be in as good position as I thought we might, but we're going to be very close to building some reserves to focus us when the structural deficit runs through our reserves and catches up with us. And that is totally unpredictable because we don't know how much damage the assault in our oil and gas industry is going to produce for Wyoming's economy and Wyoming's revenues. It could knock both our student numbers on the head and our revenue on the head. We just don't know how that's going to play out yet. But that maintenance of effort is quite constraining. So I think in that area, our endeavor is going to be somewhat frozen for a couple of years. It'll be more adjusting to what the feds did to us. And we'll have, but we can pursue things like the basket of goods and services and what the state board has come up with there, the Hathaway success curriculum. I think the two are linked together. And I have some worries that they have both gotten, I would put it, a mile wide and an inch deep, and we aren't getting some of the basics adequately taught and successfully learned. That and some of the reading intervention things, where we still, our assessment tests are showing us, are getting too many kids that don't learn how to read in those first primary grades. Nothing the feds have done, it stopped us from looking at that sort of thing. That is that side of an input to the whole funding model.
Mr. Chairman, if I may respond to that, that's precisely, once again, you've, with no surprise, you've nailed the issue on the head. You know, we have a high level of unpredictability, knowing what's coming our way on so many levels. My comments really just are designed to express the confidence and support of this committee to continue having those conversations and really doing the heavy lifting that needs to be done, not just touching on the basket of goods 5 minutes in a committee and being able to check the box that the basket's been reviewed, as others would like to suggest. These are heavy lifts. These are difficult conversations, but really positioning ourselves for the future, now is the time to be doing that. And I really believe that time is of the essence. I think your colleagues are with you on that as well, listening to some of the testimony yesterday. we don't have much more time to be positioning Wyoming's students being prepared for the economy of the future. And that's really where, the effort profile of graduate comes in as well. As we look at making sure that the basket of goods and services aligns with the skills that our students need, that profile of what every student should look like when they graduate, basic things like counting change, making decisions, exercising leadership, those are all components that oftentimes kind of get lost in some of these conversations. And, the task that we're asking our educators is to prepare our students for jobs of the future that don't exist right now is very difficult. And that's where focusing on competency-based learning, looking at some of these best practices to help us be the innovative, creative, and extremely bright people that we are, as opposed to being stuck in a rut because that's what we've always done. And so we just encourage the conversation to continue. We will be your resource and support by bringing national experts who are nonpartisan, but do these conversations as far as what best practices are for a living to help, kind of drive some of these policy conversations. So I just wanted to express that commitment to you and this committee to know that you have, a resource as these discussions go forward, and we're happy to help in any way to be an active participant.
That you just touched on something that really resonates with me. When my late wife was chair of the Natrona County School Board, she used to talk to the students and say, this business of preparing for a job that doesn't even exist today is very important. That learning the basics in reading, the ability to write, mathematics, and the sciences gives you that foundation, which then as something new arises. And the example she used to use was the crime scene investigation, the scientific abilities that calls on. She said when she was in school, that didn't exist, but it would be something if she'd gotten the right kind of education, she would have loved to have gone into. And that I think is going to be a feature of our modern world as far out as we can see, that you're going to all the time have the creation of these new things, that these basic skills are just essential to. So I think that really does have to be one of our focuses as we move forward in this. Are we getting the kind of education that can then adapt to the changes that come at us? And clearly some of the just very basic skills that should be something that every high school graduate knows, we need to pay attention to.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You're 100% correct. And bringing all the stakeholders to the table to have those conversations with the hope of getting past the word no is essential. And so that's where I think hopefully this committee will continue to offer leadership to kind of guide and shepherd those discussions so we can get past no.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else here? Anybody else? Anybody else? Seeing none, committee, I would entertain any thoughts you all have gotten. We'll just go right down the table this way. Senator
I'll
Biteman.
start the party here, Mr. Chairman. I think, well, the fact that I'm on this committee and others shows that the time of no is over. We've got to get some fundamental changes done. And when it comes to education in this state, getting through the status quo of just, this is the way things have always been done around here. Those days are over, starting right now. We've got to change what we're doing. Our funding model does not work. We are running up structural deficits that we cannot afford. That needs to be looked at. I think that's our top priority. Our efficiency, that should be our second priority, right there with looking at our funding, how we fund K-12 education. Efficiency has been ignored, probably because times have been great and the money was flowing in, so efficiency was out the window. Now we need to pinch every penny and we need to look at it through the lens of a business person. And in the business world, that's what I can probably bring to this committee. Two major issues. I think until we can get the big picture, the big issues fixed, it's going to be hard for us to get into the minutia of other educational issues until we fix the big problems. And big problems need big solutions. And I'm looking forward to doing the work with my fellow committee members. I know we have a couple workhorses on this committee. We're going to do the work and we're going to do what's right. And we've got to fix the big problems before we can even think about getting to the little stuff. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with the sentiment of the previous speaker, but they're all kind of intertwined, and that's the hard part, and that's why it's so difficult to tackle it all. One of the alternatives or ideas I proposed in here is that an educational funding model alternatives. And so coming from my background in natural resources, I'm sure all of you are familiar with something called the National Environmental Policy Act, which requires anytime there's a project that occurs on federal land, the lead agency has to do a study of different options and alternatives of what that project might look like. And I think it would really be helpful for us to understand what our options and alternatives are. And I think that that involves a discussion about what's in the basket and how we structure that. I did just a little analysis in an Excel spreadsheet several months ago about what our statutes require and kind of what I see happening. And the hard part is we don't delineate between what we offer as electives and things that we want our schools to offer to everyone versus those core teaching requirements. And so if we were ever to change the basket, I think there's always concern about what that's going to mean for the funding model. And I think we've just got to start exploring what other states do and how they structure their baskets, how they fund it, and see and try and take the best of what they've got and see how that fits with our structure. But that's not just limited to the basket and our funding model. I think it also includes things like education alternatives and options. We did pass a charter school bill, just really the focus providing a separate authorizer. And I saw the consternation that provided. But I have been in touch with a nonprofit organization who has offered to provide our committee as a joint interim to visit schools in Colorado so we can see different models out there. If you wanted to look at a charter school that has a specific focus on trade education or other areas, I think it would be really helpful for us to see what's out there. Certainly I come through this all of these topics through the lens of a parent. It's not that I think that our schools are bad or our teachers are bad. I think they're great people, and I'm proud of my kids and the schools they're attending and their teachers. But the question remains, how can we do better? And when we don't ask that question, we're not doing our job. So along those lines, we've neglected the foreign language requirement that we have for our young learners. And unfortunately, I think too often the argument I've heard is, well, from school districts is we never wanted to do this. We haven't really tried. And so please take it off the statute books. But learning foreign language isn't a benefit just for learning the language. It's good for a kid's brain. And that's why I just don't want to let go of that. But I think there's ways to improve it. So that's a topic I'd like to tackle. And then along those lines, serving in your select committee on tribal relations, we've had fits and starts of trying to look at minority student academic performance. And if you look at the NAEP scores, we always harbor on the fact that, where we rank nationally. But when you start drilling down to the numbers, I am really concerned about reading proficiency levels for our Native students on the Wind River Reservation that show in some instances, our kids are not, 85% of our young learners don't have basic reading proficiency. And there was a study that came out a while ago that talked about how Native kids were disproportionately suspended from schools. And I don't propose to have solutions to any of that, but by golly, I think it's our job to at least look at it and have the conversation without anyone feeling threatened. It's not that we're failing, it's how can we do better? And so that's a topic I'd like us to examine as well. And then we'll see kind of tied in, into that is the absenteeism laws. I do think we need to rethink how we view seat time, how we work with families and parents and how we tackle that, because if our kids aren't showing up and wanting to learn, we had a robust discussion on the House side, and a superintendent testified that one of his kids, I think, has missed 100 days. And I asked in a subsequent email, well, you can always hold the kid back, right? And he said, well, I hate to do that. I hate to hold those children back. And so then it begs the question, are we advancing kids that don't have the capability and knowledge to move up grade levels? So they're all tied together in my view, Mr. Chairman, but I'm committed to being one of the workhorses I think Senator Beitman mentioned, ready to dig in and keep working because we need to do it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Senator Salazar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I have some pretty strong views on what we should be doing this summer as well. Number one, absolutely number one topic for me would be education funding model alternatives, specifically K through 12. And then number two would be education efficiency and the basket of goods. I think most of the topics on this recommendation or proposal list are great. But the fact is, quite frankly, we're in a crisis mode with regard to how we fund education, specifically the short and long-term range. And one of the things that I hope we don't fall into the trap of doing this year is either going into overbroad topics where we don't focus in on the most important issue that I think we're facing, which is K through 12 education funding. Of course, I would love to talk about K through 3 reading assessments, and I would love to have a discussion on foreign languages. I feel strongly about that too. But given the time constraints that we have for the summer, given the crisis and the shortfall that we have, I just think that focusing in on a specific, on two specific things from my outlook of education funding model, the alternatives specifically to K through 12, and then reviewing our education efficiency, and that means the basket of goods. If we could accomplish those two things in a thoughtful manner this interim, that would be moving the earth a little to the left. And so those would be my two, Mr. Chairman.
I think there's a lot of wisdom in all of that. We are going to have to pay attention to timing. For the next 2 years or so, the feds are not going to allow us to do significant things on the overall funding. It's unfortunate, but if we take the federal money, we've got to live with the maintenance of effort requirement. And that does change the focus. I'm hearing from everybody that basket of goods needs a good hard look. Maybe that may be a focus there, because that does underpin the whole of the funding model. I'm going to add one other topic to the mix. We've absolutely got to do something about our school capital construction. Our funding source has disappeared. We cannot afford to continue to fund capital construction the way we have. We just can't. It's gone. And I don't, we passed constitutional amendment. It's up in House committee at noontime. My guess is it will not succeed in getting through the House this session. So that we've put that on the table. I think, maybe somebody's got some creative ideas out there that I haven't found. But we need to do something, and it's going to take, I think, constitutional amendment, which means it has to pass the budget session with the 2/3 vote and go to the vote of the people. So it has to be something with a good consensus. And I think that's going to need to be a focus for the Joint Interim Committee. I don't disagree with the things that y'all have enunciated. I very much agree with them. But I do think we have to add that, because it is a financial problem we've just got to deal with. And with this being a relatively low point in the demand for capital construction because of all the work that we have done, now is a good time to get it done before the demands get too high again. So I'm going to push for that as well. So, any further comments, questions? Let us talk informally. I know Senator Rothfuss wants us to look at university governance, and the problem there, as I'm hearing it, is that we're getting micromanagement from the top that is preventing the working level from getting their job done. The researchers are spending excessive amounts of times because it's too hard to get approval for changes that they routinely need to make in their research grants as research progresses and you need different things. They've worked it out with the feds, but not with our own bureaucracy. And the micromanagement is starting to impede the quality of research and instruction we can get and the quality of people we can hire. And I must say, I confess, I have a certain degree of sympathy for that point of view, because as I was taught, it's a board has a very appropriate role there in terms of selecting the chief executive officer, working out a strategy with the board and the chief executive officer, and then let your line management, which in the university's case goes through the provost and the deans and to the department heads, deal with appropriate level decisions within their budgets as you go along. That's being violated, and you're trying to get you're getting a micromanagement problem, and that may be something, maybe be able to be dealt with some hearings and not with legislation. It'd be best not to deal with legislation unless we absolutely had to. But it sounds like there's a major problem that's going to impinge on the quality of our university. So I think Chris isn't here because he's off defending another bill, but I think we need to listen sympathetically to what he's talking about there, because I think he's onto something real. And it's specifically a University of Wyoming problem. So, okay, with that, committee, we've got recalibration on the floor today.